What's going on, folks? Ted from Immersion here, and you guys let me know that the newest video from the Druid and Paladin survey launch did come out, and I guess the survey is available for you to fill out for the Unearthed Arcana 1 D&D. However, a video was launched on the official D&D YouTube channel earlier today. It's 36 minutes long, so that would make this video at minimum 36 minutes long if we were to watch just that. So what we're going to do is we are going to watch the video. We're going to watch it at 1.5 times speed, possibly 2 times speed, based on how quickly it things. I realize some of you don't like this, but this would become an hour-plus long video. And honestly, it's with 1.5 times, it's almost unnoticeable in some instances with these videos. I also have put closed captions on, so hopefully that'll help you get the idea here. So I haven't watched this yet. We're going to watch it for the first time together. So let's go ahead and put this on playback speed 1.5 times. Here we go.
Hello everyone, this survey is about to finally open up. We have basically a survey launch video that is going out beforehand though, and then also we're going to delve later on into the expert class feedback as well, right?
Yes, yeah, we've been not only seeing a lot of lively discussion online about the current Unearthed Arcana that focuses on Druids and Paladins, but also our team has been studying the feedback that we're getting on the previous Unearthed Arcanas.
We've seen some discussion about Wild Shape. What kind of discussion are we seeing there?
So the discussion on Wild Shape has been very passionate.
Yes.
Not surprised.
And I always love to see that excitement about the game. 10 years ago in the D&D Next playtest process, we then also sent out a playtest druid that had some pre-built stat blocks that people could try out. Feedback then was also very vigorous, and we ended up going in another direction.
Right.
In the intervening years, a couple of years ago, we did some surveying on the 2014 Player's Handbook, and what's fascinating is one of the main pieces of feedback we got about Wild Shape was, could we have some pre-built stat blocks?
Right.
So, in response to that feedback, we sure enough have then, in the latest UA, provided that as an option. The thing is, the D&D community is huge,
right.
And the community's tastes evolve over time. And so what we're seeing right now in the conversation is the community exploring collectively,
right.
What do we want for the druid? And so we're seeing some people who definitely do not want us to go in this new direction. And then we're all...
For the record, I am one of those people who does not want them to go in that direction. I do also think it's interesting, and it is kind of fun for them to point this out, in my opinion, because it is something I've seen too, is the general consensus movement of the thought process of the Dungeons and Dragons community, right? And it said that, like he said, apparently they did try this once before. It didn't go over well. I understand the concept behind 3 stat blocks to streamline things. It's not going to allow you to have to keep track of, which I could understand logistically it being difficult, right? I don't think any of us can disagree with that, where there could potentially be logistical difficulties if you are a druid. Remember, it's only animals that you've seen or interacted with, right? So you have to keep track of, have I seen Tyrannosaurus Rex? Have I seen a giant crocodile? And like, what if your DM uses homebrew content or makes unique specific versions of certain kinds of creatures that are still considered beasts that might have a different or unique stat block? And I know this from personal experience. I'm going to come over here and just talk to you guys real quick, because I've done this. My very first campaign for 5th edition that I ever ran, which was also streamed here on the channel a long time ago, I had a druid player character. And I love making up homebrew stat blocks and using templates and all sorts of crazy things. So I had come up with draconic versions of things, fiendish versions of things, unique creature stat blocks. And one of the things was my druid character could, in theory, turn into those as she had interacted with them. So I needed to provide her those unique stat blocks. Sometimes those stat blocks were fully developed things that I got from somewhere else. Other times they were just chicken scratch in my notebook that I came up with how to alter a specific creature. And then I'm like, okay, well, I have to write up a stat block to give it to her so that she actually has something to look at. So I can understand the concept behind this. I personally still am for unique stat blocks because you lose out on a lot of the unique abilities. Wall walking, spider climb, burrow speed, blah, 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 blind sight. You lose out on a lot of that if you just go to generic stat blocks. But like I said, another thing I thought was interesting is they're acknowledging the shift in the D&D community's majority headspace. And again, I can't speak to this with any certainty, but when I did have an opportunity to speak with Jeremy Crawford in person back in 2019, he told me at that point they weren't moving forward with any new feats of any kind because in their kind of feedback and survey information and things they'd received at that point, feats were not something that everybody was choosing to use because some people said they found it too complicated or because it was an optional rule, they chose not to use it. And then obviously we have seen a drastic shift in the community to feats are now a main function of the game. And I'm wondering if there is, again, I haven't seen it in the comments, but is there this shift in the general consensus of druids in the D&D 5e community to want to go to this more simplistic route? I don't know.
Also seeing people saying online, this is the direction of the druid they've always wanted. What that means for us going forward in this playtest process is as people then engage with the survey, write their feedback, rate things with their satisfaction, we then will thread the needle to create the druid that druid players really want. Because that, I mentioned that in our previous video, we're always looking for what is going to appeal to the people who love this thing most. So I encourage everyone who takes the survey, be upfront about what you think, be constructive,
Right.
and we will study that, and whichever direction we go in, there are a few common themes I'm already seeing in public discussion.
Right.
And now, before we make any design decisions, we want to study the survey feedback, because that's when we get the largest amount of feedback.
Right.
That's also important for people to know, that as much as people might discuss something online, often those discussions will cap out at maybe 100 or so people. When we get the survey feedback, that's from thousands of people. And so we always want to take feedback from all of these different sources, compare what we're seeing, and then plot a course. But establishing that context, what I'm already seeing is that whichever direction we go in, and because again, this is a playtest, this is not the done deal.
And that's the thing to remember when you're like watching these videos and when you're looking at the playtest itself, this is not the final form.
Absolutely
this is
not.
part of the conversation we're trying to have.
Exactly. Unearthed Arcana always is playtest.
Right.
And we have many times before introduced things in Unearthed Arcana that we then end up not publishing.
Yeah.
In fact, for the D&D Next playtest process for the 2014 Player's Handbook, we even introduced 2 versions of classes that we ended up scrapping entirely and starting over. That was the Warlock and the Sorcerer. Because of the feedback we then got, we decided, well, time to go in another direction.
Right.
So this truly is a conversation. And so I love, again, seeing the discussion, but also there's no need for anyone to fear that.
Would you guys be interested in me going back and looking at the D&D Next playtest Warlock and the D&D Next playtest Sorcerer? As you heard here, the original ones that were put out, they were basically scrapped in their entirety in favor of what we got in the 2014 Player's Handbook. I think it could be kind of interesting to take a look at that old Warlock and that old Sorcerer to see if I can find them. If you have the playtest documents, feel free to send them to me. But if you guys are curious, I'd love to maybe take a look, maybe either in the form of a live stream or just in a series of videos, review those and see what was so different then and how far with changes we're possibly going to get. Are we going back to that?
This is it.
Yeah.
Because for all of this, the conversation is the point. And
The goal is to make the thing you want.
exactly,
And we're trying to move in that direction.
And so what I am seeing as a common theme, and that's what I'm always, because I want us to bring to light to as many of our fellow D&D fans as possible. I'm always looking for the common themes.
Right.
Like even when you have, because sometimes this will happen, and we've talked over the years in past videos, the two of us, about sometimes one group of fans will want something that is diametrically opposed to another group. And
Yeah.
whenever we're in a situation like that, I look for common themes. What do they both want? They might have sort of a top line disagreement, but there might actually be a lot they have in common. And that's always what I'm looking for. And so already what I'm seeing that the two main groups when it comes to wild shape, the thing they have in common is they want some fun texture that will bring distinctiveness to the animal forms.
That's what I was saying.
And so with that in mind, if let's say we do move forward with having some custom built stat blocks for wild shape as we see currently in the Unearthed Arcana, I can see us absolutely then creating some customization options for those stat blocks so that druids can feel like there is more variation among them. Because I agree with feedback I'm seeing that the stat blocks are pretty similar to each other.
Right.
And it would be fun to bring some more distinctiveness to them.
I'm seeing a lot of feedback that is specifically about things like pack tactics. And we do have one ability like Flyby, which does exist for the flying version of Wild Shape, but that's the kind of stuff I think a lot of people are missing.
Also, some of that, I've seen similar feedback. Some of that also is about, I think, a little bit of the current Circle of the Moon in the playtest is a little too nuanced. And here's what I mean. I've seen some people say, well, I'd love for my animal form to be able to knock someone prone like some of the beasts do in the monster manual, or I'd like to be able to attack and grapple someone like some of the beasts do. The thing is the Circle of the Moon in the playtest does include that. And that actually connects to another question that we've seen about Unarmed Strike in the Circle of the Moon. But before we talk about that, I'm going to go back to the sort of common threads I'm seeing between the two sides. Because if we stick with the pre-built stat blocks like we see here, again, I could see us making customization options. However, if most of the community is like, nope, we'd like to stick with changing into these other monster stat blocks, we can absolutely make that work. And then what we need to do to address the concerns of the other group of how approachable is the class. In our previous video, we talked about the fact that the Druid is the least played class in the game. And a big part of that is because of the...
I am still shocked by that, personally. I mean, I'm not... Why would they lie in this particular instance? We all know how I've expressed my differences in a lot of the opinions with Wizards of the Coast over the years. But I can't think of a reason why you would lie and say the Druid is the most underplayed class. I'm fundamentally shocked that that is the case. Because I know so many people, and maybe this is just my own personal opinion bias from what I've seen of how many people I know who play Druids. And again, I can, like I said, I can fundamentally understand conceptually the reason why people might not want to do that. But I am still blown away that it's the least played class. But I also like what I'm hearing, where if there's diametrically opposed sides, I hate Wild Shape, the new Wild Shape, I love the new Wild Shape. Okay, well, what are the common themes? Can we meet a compromise in the middle? Or if it comes down to love the new Wild Shape is 55%, you know, or 50%, and hate the new Wild Shape is, you know, it's a 49-51% split. Maybe you go in favor of whichever one. If there's a drastic, you know, 25-75% in favor of one or the other, you make that call. But I like that they're thinking about, okay, we could add customization options. So, right, we might see something like, hey, if you're going to choose the form of the land, right, okay, you have these following options. You could choose climb speed, you could choose pack tactics, you could choose burrow speed. I don't know, things like that. And I like that ending up there could possibly be a really good compromise middle ground. I still personally think I like the idea of turning into a specific stat block. That's just me, but this could go a long way to assuage a lot of people's issues.
Complexity of going through hundreds of beast stat blocks in the game to find out which one is appropriate for my Druid. Well, we can solve for that if we go back to the monster stat block design by having a method that we actually began to explore in Xanathar's Guide to Everything of the Druid having only a certain number of stat blocks available to them, and we could even provide some of those stat blocks right there in the Druid class write-up. So what I'm saying is...
That's really interesting too. Now, I don't love the concept of limiting the stat blocks, but I'm pretty sure that I could have sworn that was a thing in 3.5. Maybe that was a self-imposed thing I put on myself back in the day. But I thought like you could only choose a certain number of forms based. In my mind, this is what I'm remembering, and it's, mind you, I haven't played D&D 3.5 in almost 20 years at this point, to give you a frame of reference. Still remember it very fondly since I was a player, mind you. I've ran games since then, but I could have sworn that I had limited myself to one animal form per size. Right? So if this was a medium-sized creature I could turn into, this one form I chose. A large size, I could choose this form. A small size this, tiny size this, and so on. And that might actually not be a bad one, too. You'd have to be strategic, right, in what you choose. Think this through, right? You're only going to have a limited number of forms. And I kind of think that might be the ultimate middle ground, potentially, right? The people who want the limited stat blocks are because they want to not sift through so many. So how about we just hard limit it to a certain number, whatever the factor is, and then we maybe include those stat blocks.
We can actually bridge and make sure that the distinctiveness that both groups of players want is there, and then we'll see if we land with that distinctiveness being carried by custom-built stat blocks for the Druid, or being carried by monster stat blocks from the Monster Manual and other sources, but curated. Right. So that a new player is not said, well, now go look at 100 stat blocks and find the one that is appropriate for your Druid. Now, let's go back to the unarmed strike.
Yeah.
We're going to get to, to that in a second. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty promising to me. As far as listening to feedback and trying to do what players want. It does, at least, again, it's an interview, it's a video, take it with a grain of salt. But the way I see that is it does truly seem like they're not sure where they're going with this, right? This playtest, these videos, they don't seem like this is just like a fluff piece that they're doing to provide the illusion of caring about this kind of stuff. It does truly seem to me that they really don't know what the future of the D&D, of the 1D&D Druid will be. It's pretty much, it sounds completely up in the air based on playtest feedback, and they are considering both sides of the story, not just because they developed custom stat blocks, like that's the route they're going to go. They're still willing to consider the other side of the argument. And honestly, I don't know what more you could ask for. I mean, people might just say, just leave it alone as it is. Well, we know they're going to change some things. This is kind of an evolution of the previous edition. We know that. So if you're going to change something, at least be thankful in my mind that they're considering both sides of the argument.
Yeah.
So there was some question on, was it intentional that the combat wild shape feature in the Circle of the Moon lets you use unarmed strike as a bonus action, as opposed to bestial strike? It is absolutely intentional that it's unarmed strike. And this is where the playtest document really becomes critical. In this playtest document, unarmed strike is a game object defined in the rules glossary, and it is a very special game object now that whenever you use it, you have three choices. You're deciding, am I going to deal damage with it? Am I going to try to shove someone with it, which can involve knocking them prone or pushing them away? Or am I grappling them with it? Meaning, those things, knocking someone prone, pushing them away, grappling, are all contained under that very simple umbrella term, unarmed strike.
Right.
And so, yep, it's intentional, and it's intentional that the Druid in the playtest in beast form, if you have Circle of the Moon as your subclass, be able to do that as a bonus action, which then becomes really potent when you get to a level, especially when you can use multi-attack in the beast forms, and then also use your unarmed strike as a bonus action.
And then you can shove them. Then you can.
Okay, so that answers a question that a lot of us had. Here's my thing. The fact that they're bringing it up specifically, that so many questioned whether that was how it was supposed to work, is clearly, in my opinion, means to show you that it wasn't that clear, right? You may have thought it was clear in the document that you released, but if so many people are calling it out that you feel the need to specifically address it in a separate video, means that it wasn't abundantly clear to the mass populace. So, okay, that makes sense. That, again, alleviates some of the customized options and the shove prone grapple aspect, but I still think the stat blocks need something a little more unique.
Grapple them. So if you want to play that kind of like serpent-like character, you can do that.
You can, absolutely, in the current design.
And that is intended for when you are in a wild shape form.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Because everything in the game has
Not
access to unarmed strike. Like, whatever your character sheet is or your stat block, you have access to unarmed strike. That's not only true in the playtest, that's also true in the 2014 rule set.
Can a first level druid use wild shape since it lasts for a number of hours equal to half the druid's level?
This is a great question. And so the context behind that question is people know there's the general rule in the game of rounding down. And so reading that, and because the rule doesn't tell you to round up or whatever, then applying the general rule, it would seem
I totally missed that, and that's really funny.
that at first level it zeroes out. The intention is that you don't round at all. For this. And here we just, in a future version, we need to make that clear that no, you absolutely can use it at first level, and the intent is that it lasts for half an hour.
Why is the tiny creature feature at 11th level?
That is a great question. It has entirely
Also
to
great.
do with how resilient the new beast forms are.
Right.
So in the 2014 Player's Handbook, you can become a tiny creature as a druid at very low level. The thing is, though, that the tiny forms that you can assume tend to have very few hit points.
Right.
And because in the 2014 rules, once you lose those extra hit points that the creature gives you, you're knocked out of the form, it meant that, especially in combat, you could not actually stay tiny for very long. And you also, by becoming tiny, we're accepting the typically very low ability scores in those tiny creatures and the almost non-existent amount of damage that they dealt.
Right.
So it was purely a scouting form. So
see,
in
I
this
agree.
current playtest, because when you assume one of these animal forms, you still have all your hit points. You now have also a number of your combat relevant scores based on your wisdom modifier.
Right.
You are suddenly way more resilient than the rat that you could have turned into in the 2014 rules. And suddenly what that means is if you have all your hit points and a chunky armor class,
Okay.
because also the new animal forms have better ACs than most of the low CR beasts that you could turn into. So you have a higher AC, you have more hit points than most of those tiny forms. You can deal more damage than most of those tiny forms. If you could be tiny and stay tiny for hours and be in combat, suddenly that creates a lot of tactical shenanigans. For instance, you can move through the space of an enemy who is 2 or more sizes larger or smaller than you, meaning as a tiny creature with essentially all the regular hit points and AC and damage of a humanoid, you could run through the space of every enemy that you're fighting. That undermines a lot of sort of defensive tactics. Now, we of course are allowing it here. It's here. Is it too high of a level? It very well could be. I mean, again, this is a playtest. And we're playtesting to see where is the right place for someone who is this resilient to be this small. Now, if in the playtest feedback we see a lot of desire for this to be lower level, and the community wants us to stick with the sort of custom-made stat blocks, then we will adjust to make it.
I don't agree with this. So they brought up the fact that most times people use a tiny form would be for scouting purposes, and I agree. But there's never been maybe again, please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I can't really think of a situation where I'd be like, you know what, I want to be in this fight a rat. And you know what? I'd rather be a rat than a brown bear. And I understand that functionally in this new version, being a brown bear versus being a rat would be fundamentally in every single possible way almost exactly identical, with the exception of the tiny creature being able to move through a medium creature's space. I don't know. I mean, it's not like in my head you'd be like, oh, I'm tiny, I should be harder to hit, right? Because I'm smaller in size. Well, that's not the case. You keep the base AC as part of the stat block. Just because you're tiny or huge or large size, you have the same exact AC. You deal the same exact damage. So I understand the concept, and I did start to come to reconcile with this a little bit after the fact, where like if you're a smaller sized creature, normally you get knocked out of that form relatively easily because of the lack of hit points, whereas in this case you wouldn't get knocked out of that form because you would have your base hit points. But I feel like I'd be fine keeping the tiny form, but the fact that it's tiny and it's just weaker, and I'm okay with that, right? It's just for scouting purposes only. I don't really see myself using it for a lot of combat shenanigans. Maybe I'm wrong, though.
So that you can do this at a lower level. If we go back to using monster stat blocks from the monster manual and elsewhere, well, then the issue vanishes, and then we just need to determine, or do we go back to you getting a certain number of extra hit points from the shape that you assume, and then do you get knocked out of the shape when you lose those hit points? Like, that's the critical difference. That's why there is that difference in level. But there is also, especially in the playtest for the Circle of the Moon Druid, and similar to that Unarmed Strike thing that might be too nuanced for its own good, there is a lot of power hiding out in the Moon Druid's ability to cast abjuration spells in beast form. Because, again, that includes, in the playtest, healing spells. If with Magic Initiate you've picked up the shield spell, it means you're casting shield.
You're very keen on that concept as well.
So, again, you might not be getting, as a Circle of the Moon Druid, the hit point boost that you were getting before, but you are getting other boosts in the current playtest. We're going to
I'd rather have the hit points.
See what mix is right. I think we will easily see another version of the Druid in this UA process, possibly more than one new version. We will basically iterate until the community collectively says thumbs up.
Yeah.
I worry about that because they did commit to still being set on a 2024 release date for 1D&D, and if you're going to be only doing these once every other month, how are you going to have multiple versions of this when it's already almost April?
Yeah, and that's the point.
Yes,
the point is to be listening.
Of the whole process.
Yeah, so that brings us to Paladin. Smite has changed quite a bit. I think one of the things that's key on everyone's mind is Divine Smite. Can you crit with it?
So the intention is that you can.
Okay.
And the current...
Whoa! Hold on. Hold the phone.
Is...
You can crit? Oh my god, this changes everything. Let's watch that again. Let's go to the tape.
We will basically iterate until the community collectively says thumbs up.
Yeah, And that's that again.
This
that's the point.
changes
That's the point is to be
everything.
listening.
Of the whole process.
Yeah, so that brings us to Paladin. Smite has changed quite a bit. I think one of the things that's key on everyone's mind is Divine Smite. Can you crit?
Watch this.
So the intention is that you can.
Okay.
And
Can.
the current wording is unclear on that point. So seeing people question that is, again, that's why we have a playtest process of, okay, we need to be clearer on this. And in fact, one of the design notes we have for the dev process.
That's
on
amazing.
The
I'm more or less 100% in on Paladin changes with that adjustment.
2024 Player's Handbook is we need to go through and make sure it's clear everywhere if something can crit or not. Because this is a question that has come up about various features for years, and we will make it super duper clear that Divine Smite can still crit. And again, it's the current wording is a little murky.
There was wording in there saying specifically you can't cast a spell if you use Divine Smite that same turn, correct?
That's correct. In the playtest, you cannot cast a spell and use Divine Smite on the same turn.
Yeah, and that means you can't circumvent this by using Divine Smite first and then later on using a spell.
Or vice versa.
Yeah.
And if we see a lot of questions about that, then of course we will make it super duper clear.
All right, so my potential loophole does not work. The one that I specifically called out where I said, what if I cast the spell first and then Divine Smite, or the other way around? All right, so that doesn't work, but Smites can still crit, so points there.
That regardless of the order, the two cannot coexist on the same turn.
So ranged weapons in Smite. This is like, I knew about this. I think we touched on it in the previous video, but this is a pretty big deal. But you can smite with ranged weapons. So if you have a crossbow, if you have a bow.
I mentioned last time that we for years have resisted this because of turf protection. One of the, and that's also one reason why for years the Paladin couldn't unarmed strike and Divine Smite, because then that was viewed as encroaching on the monk's territory.
Right.
And then people are now concerned is
The ranger.
or the fighter.
Yeah.
Because the fighter and the ranger are the two classes that tend to be the masters of ranged weapons.
Right.
We are gathering fan sentiment on this.
Dude, everybody loves it. I'm in, 100% in. Maybe you're not. I'd love to hear your differing opinion, but everybody that I've seen smiting with punches and smiting with bows, everybody's on board.
If it ends up staying as a part of our dev process where we dig into the underlying balance, it is possible that we would end up making the ranged smite deal less damage than the melee one, because paladins do have a tremendous advantage over at least rangers, because paladins can wear heavy armor.
Right.
Fighters can as well. I mean, a fighter can pepper someone hundreds of feet away wearing plate mail
Right.
while wielding a longbow. But that's the glory of being a fighter.
Yeah.
If people want this, we will make it so that the math works.
Right.
But it could turn out that people don't want it and it will go away.
People want it.
If I were to guess, I'm guessing essentially the punchadin will stay and the ranged will go away. But I could be wrong.
Yeah.
And that's again,
Keep
it's
it.
why I keep an open mind when not only I look at the discussion online as well as when we go to the survey feedback, because the audience is so big that we're often surprised.
So there's a rules clarification as well that you've seen having to do with dying and stable. Is there a reason that stable is not there?
Stable is intentionally not present. Our goal is for it to go away because it is a sort of quasi-condition that the game frankly doesn't need. And as a part of this process, it's an opportunity for us to look for things in the rules that are not necessary. Because it's already possible with our conditions to have you be at 1 hit point and unconscious. There's no need to have this extra thing where you're at 0, but you're not dying, but you're stable. It's like, no, we can just say
All for this change. It was complicated and unnecessary. Big fan of the changes to dying and stability.
you have 1 hit point and you're unconscious.
Perfect.
So that's about just sort of looking for places to snip out things that are not really doing much for the game. I don't like it when we have in our rules details that don't really have much upside for you remembering them. And I always want to look for ways that we can make it so that if there is something you have to remember, that you're glad you remembered it. Like again, there's some kind of upside to the play experience.
Here at the end, we are going to talk about the satisfaction scores from the expert classes, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm very curious about this. For those of you who don't know, the little bit that I have been able to play what was a regular Tuesday game that's kind of just become a once every couple of months game at this point. I have been playtesting the Thief Rogue from the playtest, so I'm curious to hear what the feedback on that survey was.
We finally get to dig into this.
There was so much amazing feedback. I am looking at the feedback report that I received. It's nearly 20 pages long because that
AKA
Unearthed Arcana
Rangers
not
would
only
need help.
had 3 classes, it also had tons of feats and also a very large rules glossary.
Right, yeah.
So first I'll start with the classes. And again, just to make sure everyone knows what classes we're talking about the Bard, we're talking about the Ranger, and we're talking about the Rogue. And each of them basically landed in a different sort of satisfaction span. So the Ranger was really beloved and is in the 80s.
What? I'm sorry. What? Okay, it's better. It's better than the base Ranger in the 2014 Player's Handbook, but beloved though? Okay. I'd love to hear this. We're gonna listen in on a second here, but like, beloved, it didn't have anything still very unique. Like, it wasn't. It needed some kind of specialty thing. That's kind of been Ranger's whole problem the whole time. All right, let's go. I'm sorry, I'm a little animated about this, even though it's 4 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
So the Ranger who gets the reward for most improved class,
Right.
because typically when we've done satisfaction polling on the Ranger, the satisfaction score has varied over the years, but it has rarely over 50% and sometimes has been as low as like 20. You know, in the
Yeah,
20s.
accurate.
So we're looking at a satisfaction score in the 80s now for the playtest
that
Ranger.
doesn't track.
And then when I dig in and look at the scores for the individual features, almost every feature in the new Ranger got a satisfaction score of 80% or higher. There are a few in the high 70s. And then when we get to the Hunter subclass, every individual feature scored in the 70s or 80s, except for multi-attack. That was in the low 60s. So definitely we have some improvement to do there. And then the Hunter overall was low 70s in terms of satisfaction. So it's sort of like we've talked before, we view that as like, all right, it's okay.
Right.
Okay.
We don't interpret that as a sort of a thumbs down on it. But what's interesting is the features, again, with the exception of multi-attack and the Hunter, the features scored higher than the subclass itself. And so then when we look into the written feedback for why that might be, it really comes down to one thing, and that is people missing some of the choices they had in the Hunter. So I see that, and I'm like, well, that is the path to addressing that is straightforward for us, and that is bring back some choices.
Yeah.
Okay, you know what? We have said part of this whole OGL debacle outcry, or a part of that, was making sure that we see the feedback and we hear about how things are incorporated. Transparency. Now, again, WotC is the sole source of truth on this, so you have to take that again with a grain of salt. However, it's nice to see that people were complaining, myself included, about the lack of options, and basically their response is, okay, we'll put options back in. All right.
But overall, with the Ranger, a ton of excitement. But again, once you dig into the written feedback, a lot of little things here and there for us to adjust, for us to improve, for us to clarify. So even when we have something that gets such enthusiastic satisfaction as the playtest Ranger, we still dig into the written feedback to see, okay, but what can we make even better?
Yeah.
Okay.
What is going to make this Ranger that is getting this positive sentiment truly shine for years
I'm
to
very
come?
curious about the
Now,
Bard and the Rogue.
the Bard was in the 70s. So we had the Ranger in the 80s, the Bard was in the 70s.
Okay.
Oh,
and
no.
the Bard features also, when you look in the core class, were all, in terms of satisfaction, in the high 70s and low 80s. So
Okay,
again,
that tracks.
the core class,
I think that was fine.
overall, people are digging it.
Okay.
I'm
in
down.
The feedback.
I agree.
Now, the College of Lore is fascinating because in the College of Lore, every feature was in the 70s and mostly in the mid to high 70s. Yet the subclass got 67%.
Oh, okay.
And,
Magical
and again,
secrets.
this is why, if anyone's ever wondered, why do we ask for the satisfaction on like the subclass in its entirety and then the individual features? Because it really helps us.
It paints a picture, yeah.
It paints a picture. Like, well, okay, overall, people were satisfied with the individual features, score-wise. Again, once we dig into the written feedback, we'll find things that people would like to see improve. So then the question is, why then did the subclass overall get a lower score? Well, our main answer when we dug into it was that people
Magical
missed
secrets.
the additional magic secret.
That was the biggest feedback that I saw, so that makes sense.
It was that simple. There are a few other things for us to address, but that's the main thing. And again, great feedback for us to see that there were people who really viewed additional magical secrets as a key element of the College of Lore, and that's absolutely something we can address.
I mean, I talked about it. I have multiple videos on it. I don't really need to do that again, but I actually very much like all of the changes I saw to the Bard. I was pretty okay with most of it, and I actually didn't mind the changes to the no magical secrets. I liked a lot of what I saw. So I'm curious to see where it goes, as long as the majority of what we saw. Now, does that mean that the Rogue came in the 90s? Because that'll be very exciting. But if the Rogue came in the 60s, I'll be shocked.
Perfect.
The Bard
Now
of the
I'm nervous about
70s.
the rogue.
So the rogue class overall got 68%.
What?
But here the story is going to be especially fascinating because the features inside the rogue got amazingly high scores.
Interesting.
Every feature in the rogue got a score between 79 and 81% satisfaction,
That's very high.
with 2 exceptions.
Okay.
Evasion at 76%, so that's fine.
Yeah.
And then sneak attack at 61%.
Kind of the core thing.
And so what's fascinating is then when we look for this big disconnect where the individual
What?
features within the playtest rogue, almost all of them people were thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. But then the overall class, the score was all the way at 68%.
What?
We found the culprit and it was sneak attack.
And how much people identify with that.
This actually was not a surprise to us. Because seeing the discussion online when this Unearthed Arcana came out, we saw, okay, sneak attack is going to be the sticking point. And it comes down to no off-turn use. In the playtest version, the rogue was able to use sneak attack only on their own turn.
Yeah.
And this was amazingly good feedback for us to see.
Okay. All right. I forgot about that. If I'm being completely honest with you, that it was only on the rogue's turn. It's been so long since that came out, I actually forgot about it completely. That tracks. All right, that makes sense now.
See how much people value the tactical flexibility of being able to use sneak attack on, say, opportunity attacks. And that is something we can absolutely restore. We often will look for opportunities to move things onto people's turns. And sometimes people will wonder, is that because the thing was too powerful? Often not. Often what we're doing is we're looking for ways to speed up play.
Yeah.
Because as often as possible, if you can keep things on, especially a person's main activity, like sneak attack, or a spellcaster's spells that they cast with spell slots, the more we can keep those on people's turns, the faster the game tends to go. And one of the pieces of feedback we've received for years is people love it when the game moves at a nice clip.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
We'll often look for, is this a place where we could speed things up? But again, we always want to balance that with other things people enjoy. So we got a very clear answer here that the potential speed increase is far outweighed by people's desire to have the tactical flexibility of being able to sneak attack even on someone else's turn.
Okay.
Something absolutely that
Down,
we can
100%
restore
down.
in the next version of the Rogue.
Works for me.
Again, I see this and I'm like, that's great because we got some really clear communication and the response is absolutely something that we can give.
On some level, as someone who plays a rogue quite a bit, like you'll already want to get away with something. Like even if it's mechanically, like yeah, of course rogues want more sneak attack. Who wouldn't?
Yeah.
Yeah, and an easy fix.
We got other feedback about sneak attack. I mean, there are, some people wondering, could the damage be higher, etc.
It's fine.
Could we pile other effects on top of it? We will consider all of that as we
Right.
work on
I think
the
sneak
next
attack-
version of the
okay.
Rogue for people to play test.
Perfect.
So then that leads us to the Thief subclass. The subclass itself got 70%.
Really? That
And
low?
the features, with one exception, all got scores in the mid to high 70s. That one exception is Fast Hands, and really the request that we're seeing is for the Fast Hands feature to have more combat utility, and we also see questions about the removal of the use an object action
Yeah.
as an option in this feature. And we are still exploring how to resolve the use of use an object in features like that. We're not satisfied with the murkiness of the use an object action in the 2014 rule set. And what I mean here is if anyone's ever wondered, like, does using this alchemist fire use that action? Does using this lever use that action?
Yeah.
It, in a way, was put on the shelf while we were playtesting the Rogue, while we get to a place that we're satisfied with the use an object action itself. So I would just say for people, stay tuned as we continue to tinker, and we'll
I
see
like
where things
the
land
Thief
for
Rogue
that
a
action,
lot, personally.
and then by extension for the Fast Hands feature in the Thief.
Perfect.
I won't go over the individual feats, but I can say this. Every feat that was not an epic boon scored in the 70s and 80s when it comes to satisfaction.
Wow.
That was in the expert playtest.
Right.
So a lot of excitement combined with some really great granular feedback. I'm looking at it on my screen about here, different things that people would love to see us to adjust in those individual feats. When you get to the epic boons, and you and I talked about this in another video, then it starts getting all over the place. Some of the epic boons people are super excited about. Others have been unsatisfying for people. Not surprising, because with the epic boon feats, we're taking a set of options that previously existed in the Dungeon Master's Guide and did not go through the D&D Next playtest process.
Right.
We're now basically bringing them into the public playtest process for the first time. So us seeing, sort of these varying satisfaction scores, that's to be expected because they are now being made to go through
the correct process,
the full process, and we'll iterate on them until they all land in an exciting place.
Was there anything that was most stunning to you in the survey results?
Probably the thing that surprised me most was how high the scores were for the feats.
Yeah.
And so it was cool to see that, but I'm also excited to dig into the granular feedback to see how we can make even the things people like, we look for ways to make them even better. Also, the rules glossary in that UA got a lot of fantastic written feedback, and also the scores. Most of the rules in the rules glossary were in the 80s.
Perfect.
Now, speaking of the rules glossary, I think maybe a great place for us to close is as people take the survey to remember that the rules glossary of each of these Unearthed Arcanas replaces all of the previous rules glossaries.
Right.
However, there is now a complication. In the latest UA, we moved spells out of the rules glossary on purpose. So, there are no spells in the new rules glossary.
Right.
That does not mean that all the spells from the previous UAs are now removed from the playtest. So that kind of guidance that one rules glossary replaces a previous rules glossary, that's still true, but it does not apply to spells because, like feats, spells are now in their own section of these playtest documents.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much. The survey is coming out very soon, so be sure to take that. And thank you for all the comments. Thank you for all of your thoughts and your constructive criticism. But don't forget to fill out the survey. That's the best way to give your feedback.
All right, there you have it, folks. This video ended up being 40 minutes after all anyway. But hey, if we didn't watch it at 1.5 times speed, the whole base video was 36 minutes. So that's why we do it. We probably could have bumped it up to 1.75, maybe even 2 times speed. But I know you guys don't like it when I go too fast on the watch speeds. So yeah, this was interesting to hear. Some good things came out of it. Some things surprised me a little bit of what scored higher than others. I would love to see a separate video like the one we just saw just about the feats from that. I don't know if they're going to do something like that, but I do appreciate seeing this. I do appreciate getting some more insight into the feedback process, what people liked, how the written feedback differs from the individual feature feedback. This is good stuff. This is the stuff that we wanted to make sure was happening so that we know when we provide thoughts and feedbacks on these things that it's actually taken into consideration. Like I said, my biggest takeaway, Paladins can crit with Divine Smite in the new Unearthed Arcana. And while I know the survey may be out possibly by the time you're watching this video, I am going to try my best to hold off a little bit to see if I can possibly get at least one playtest in of either the Druid or more than likely for me, the Paladin, so I can give it a shot and see how I like it. I'm hoping I can get something scheduled. If I can't, I can't, and then I'll just take the survey. But anyway, let me know your thoughts and opinions on this video in the comments down below. I'll see you all next time.